echoes of the unseen. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the video.
We'd love to know where you're from and what time you're watching this.
So leave it in the comments.
When you're ready, get comfortable and relax.
The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in a final, tired wash of orange and bruised purple. I stood at the edge of my cornfield, the stalks taller than a man, dry and brittle in the cooling air. Another day done. The silence was a comfort, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the rows. This field, this land, it was my life. I knew every furrow, every stalk, or so I thought. A sound not of the wind broke the quiet. A rustle, distinct and sharp, from deep within the field. It was too deliberate to be a squirrel or a fox. I froze, my hand tightening on the handle of my shovel. The sound came again. Closer this time, a dry, scraping whisper that seemed to speak a language I didn't understand. I told myself it was just an animal, a deer perhaps, spooked by my presence. I turned and started walking toward the farmhouse, but the feeling of being watched was a physical weight on my back. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my heart a drum against my ribs. The rows of corn seemed to lean in, a silent, menacing crowd. And then I saw it, a shape, impossibly tall and gaunt, moving between the rows. It wasn't an animal. It was a tangle of interwoven stalks and twisted vines, a scarecrow come to life. Its movement was not a walk, but a fluid, unnatural lurch, like a marionette with broken strings. My breath caught in my throat. Wind, panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I broke into a run, the sound of my boots on the dirt path echoing in the twilight. The rustling behind me quickened. A dry, scraping sound that kept pace with my frantic strides. It was no longer a whisper. It was a hungry pursuit. I reached the porch, fumbling with the key, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The scraping sound was right behind me, a wet, tearing noise that made my skin crawl. I got the key in the lock, twisted it, and slammed the door shut just as a heavy thud hit the wood from the other side. I locked every door, every window, my heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. I crept to the living room, peeking through a crack in the curtains. It was standing in the yard, motionless. It was taller than I had thought, its spindly form a grotesque silhouette against the last light of day. It began to move, slowly at first, then with a sudden, horrifying lurch. It glided across the lawn, its limbs a blur of motion, and pressed its face against the window. Its hollow, black eyes, like twin voids, stared in at me. There was no malice in them, only an endless, alien hunger. I backed away from the window, stumbling over a chair. Its gaze seemed to pierce through the glass, through the walls, right into the core of my being. It was not just a creature. It was a piece of the field, a manifestation of the land's hidden, cosmic dread. It wanted something from me, something I couldn't comprehend. I spent the night in a state of terror, listening to the scraping sounds on the walls and the roof. It was a constant, maddening rhythm. When the first light of dawn broke, the sound stopped. A silence returned, but it was no longer a comfort. It was a promise. I went outside at dawn. The thing was gone. But the cornfield was different. The stalks were no longer just plants. They were standing unnaturally still, their leaves seeming to turn towards me. Every rustle of the wind now sounded like a whisper. 100 voices speaking in unison. I know it's not over. The thing is part of the field now, and the field is part of me. I am the farmer, but the corn is the hunter, and I am trapped, forever stalked by the silent, watchful stalks of my own land. I tried to leave. I packed a bag, got in my truck, and drove down the long dirt road that led to the highway. But every turn I took led me back to the same place, the rusted gate at the edge of my own field. The road twisted and bent in ways it never had before, a labyrinth of my own making. The whispers grew louder. Not just the wind now, but a dry, sibilant chorus. They spoke in a language I could almost understand, a language of roots and soil, and the slow, inevitable growth of things that should not be. They spoke of hunger. I stopped fighting. I went back to the farmhouse, the truck's engine sputtering to a halt. The field had won. I was its prisoner, and the thing was my warden. I started to see its shape in the shadows, in the way the stalks leaned, in the patterns of the dry leaves on the ground. The nights were the worst. I would lie in bed, listening to the scraping on the walls, and the dreams would come. Dreams of being a seed, buried deep in the earth, feeling the slow, patient pull of the sun and the moon. Dreams of growing, of my limbs becoming stalks, my thinkers becoming roots. I began to talk to it, to the field, to the thing. I would stand at the edge of the rows and whisper my fears, my regrets, my exhaustion. And the wind would rustle back, a dry, knowing sound that felt like a response. I was losing my mind. It wasn't just the field anymore. The house itself felt alive. The floorboards creaked with a rhythm that wasn't mine. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift and writhe. I saw its hollow eyes in the knots of the wood, in the cracks in the plaster. One afternoon, I found a single perfect ear of corn on my kitchen table. I hadn't put it there. It was clean, golden, and utterly out of place. It felt like a gift, a peace offering, or a warning. I picked it up. It was heavy, and the husks felt like dry skin. I peeled them back, and the kernels were not yellow. They were a deep, unsettling black, like the thing's eyes. I dropped it, and it clattered to the floor, a sound like 100 tiny bones. The thing appeared again that evening. It didn't stalk me. It simply stood in the middle of the field, waiting. Its form was clearer now, less a tangle of stalks and more, a unified, grotesque being. It was the field's heart, its consciousness. I walked towards it. I don't know why. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with a strange, weary acceptance. I was tired of running. I was tired of being hunted. I wanted to understand. It did not move as I approached. Its hollow eyes, those twin voids, seemed to pull me in. I stood before it, and I saw not a monster, but a reflection. A reflection of the land's ancient pain, its endless cycle of life and death, of planting and harvesting. A tendril, a thin, dry vine, unspooled from its chest and reached out. It touched my hand. It was not cold or wet, but dry and brittle, like old paper. I felt a jolt, not of pain, but of 1,000 memories rushing into my mind. Memories of seasons, of rain and drought, of the slow turning of the earth. The last thing I remember is the feeling of my own skin turning to husk, my bones becoming brittle stalks. I am the field now. I am the hunter and the hunted. I am the whisper in the wind and the hollow eyes that watch from the darkness. And I am waiting. Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark. They'd always warned me about the river. The old-timers in the village, their voices low and serious, spoke of a presence that haunted the banks. I always scoffed, a man of logic and reason, dismissing their tales as folklore meant to keep children away from the treacherous currents. But tonight, a strange pull drew me closer than I'd ever been. The air grew heavy with the scent of wet earth and decay. The mist, thick as a shroud, clung to the trees, muting the world around me. I told myself it was just the weather, a typical evening by the water, but a shiver traced its way up my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a pale shape just beyond the veil of mist. It was gone in an instant. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a branch swaying in the non-existent wind. But the silence that followed was too absolute, too unnatural. The warnings echoed in my mind now, not as quaint stories, but as dire prophecies. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague unease. It was a physical weight on my shoulders. I heard a sound then, a soft, wet slithering, like something dragging itself through the mud. Dot, dot, I saw her. Not a trick of the light, not a branch. She was there, a gaunt figure partially obscured by the mist, her form impossibly thin. She was watching me, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. A cold dread, unlike anything I had ever known, seeped into my bones. She began to move, not walking, but gliding, her body a fluid, boneless thing. The slithering sound grew louder. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet were rooted to the ground. My mind screamed at me to flee, but my body refused to obey. She was closer now, the details of her horror becoming sickeningly clear. Her skin was stretched and translucent, the sinew and bone a grotesque map beneath. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to swallow the light. My breath hitched in my throat. A silent, desperate gasp. She raised a hand, a long skeletal appendage that seemed to stretch impossibly. I could see the dark, wet earth clinging to her fingertips. The air grew colder, and the scent of decay was overwhelming. I tried to turn, to break free from the invisible chains that held me, but it was no use. Her presence was a physical force, a crushing weight that stole the air from my lungs. The warnings, the laughter, the dismissals, they all came crashing down on me. I was a fool, a proud, arrogant fool who had walked straight into the mouth of a nightmare. Her face was inches from mine. The hollow black eyes were not just empty. They were a void, a swirling darkness that promised oblivion. I could feel the cold radiating from her, a chill that went beyond the skin and settled deep in my soul. I knew then that there was no escape. Her touch was colder than any ice, a final, unholy caress. It wasn't pain that I felt, but a profound emptiness, a draining of everything that made me, me. My skepticism, my reason, my very life force, it was all being pulled away, drawn into the river's cold embrace. Now, I am a part of the river. I am the whisper on the wind, the cold dread that settles in the mist. I am the warning that no one heeds. And I believe in the river witch, and I believe in the terror that waits for those who dare to walk her banks. I believe the cold wasn't just a sensation. It was a presence, a consciousness that was seeping into my very being. My thoughts, once my own, were becoming fractured, replaced by a deep, ancient silence. I was no longer a man, but a vessel, a conduit for the river's will. I saw my reflection in the dark water, but it wasn't me. It was a gaunt, spectral image, my eyes hollowed out, my skin stretched and pale. The man I was, the man of logic and reason, was fading, a ghost in the murky depths. She was still there, a silent sentinel on the bank, her form a twisted silhouette against the mist. Her hollow eyes were fixed on me, and I knew she was the architect of this horror, the puppeteer pulling the strings of my dissolution. I tried to scream, to fight, to push myself out of the water, but my limbs were heavy, unresponsive. It was like trying to run in a dream, a desperate, futile struggle against an invisible force. The river held me, and the witch held the river. Her voice, a cold, wet whisper, echoed in my mind. It wasn't a language, but a feeling. The cold of the depths, the hunger of the mud, the endless patience of stone. It was a promise of oblivion, a siren song of decay. My skin felt like it was stretching, becoming thin and translucent. I could see the faint outline of my own bones beneath the surface. I was no longer a man of flesh and blood, but a fragile, grotesque thing, a mockery of life. The faces of the others, the ones who had come before me, flashed in my mind's eye. Their eyes were as hollow as hers, their forms as gaunt. They were the whispers, the shadows, the wardings. I was joining their ranks, becoming a part of the river's endless, silent chorus. The river witch's face was a constant presence now, a haunting visage in the swirling water. She was not just a creature of the river. She was the river itself, a living, breathing nightmare of mud and bone. I felt the pull of the current, not a physical force, but a spiritual one. It was drawing me down into the cold, dark heart of the river. My life, my memories, my very soul. It was all being pulled into the abyss. My hand, once strong and calloused, was now a skeletal appendage reaching up from the water. A final, desperate plea for help that would never be answered. The last vestige of my humanity was slipping away. I was a part of the riverbed now, a silent, unmoving thing. The world above was a murky, distorted blur. I could feel the cold earth, the slow creep of the currents, the weight of the water. I was the river's secret, a forgotten horror. Then I saw them. A new pair of feet, standing on the bank. A new voice, scoffing at the warnings. I felt a familiar dread, a cold, wet slithering in the mud. I wanted to scream, to warn them, but all that came out was a soft, wet sound. I am the warning now. I am the whisper on the wind, the sound in the mud, the cold dread that settles in the mist. I am the river witch's echo, and I believe in the terror that waits for those who dare to walk her banks. I believe. Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark. The fog rolled in like a slow, silent tide, swallowing the streetlights one by one. I'd been walking for an hour, trying to outrun the thoughts that had been chasing me all day. The cold bit at my skin, but it was a welcome sting, a distraction from the gnawing emptiness inside. I was alone, or so I thought. A sound. A rustle in the overgrown bushes that lined the road. It was probably just a stray cat or a raccoon, I told myself. The town was old and full of them. I picked up my pace, the crunch of my boots on the gravel a loud, reassuring rhythm in the oppressive silence. The sound came again, closer this time. A dry, scraping noise, like a branch being dragged across concrete. It was too low to be a cat, too deliberate to be a raccoon. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold snaked its way up my spine. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet night. I saw it then, a fleeting shadow at the edge of my vision, too tall and too thin to be a person. It was a flicker of movement in the fog, a shape that shouldn't exist. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. It was just a trick of the light and the fog, I told myself. A figment of my overactive imagination. I turned and continued walking, but now I was running. The cold air burned my lungs, and the tattered jacket flapped behind me like a broken wing. I didn't look back, but I knew it was there. A new sound, a scraping, dragging noise right behind me. It was a sound that made my skin crawl, a sound of bone on concrete. It was a presence, a cold void that was sucking the air out of the night. I didn't dare look back. I just ran faster, my legs burning with the effort. I reached the safety of my porch, my lungs screaming for air. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The scraping sound stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. I could feel its eyes on my back. I got the door open and slammed it shut, leaning against it, gasping for air. I was safe. I was inside. The lock clicked into place with a finality that felt like a prayer. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing heart. I was safe. I looked out the window. The fog was a solid wall of white. But then, two hollow black eyes appeared, pressed against the glass. The skinwalker shadow. It was there, its gaunt, emaciated face, a terrifying mask of stretched, translucent skin that revealed the sinew and bone beneath. Its mouth opened, a silent, gaping maw. It let out a sound I could only hear in my mind, a shriek of pure, unadulterated hunger. It wasn't a sound of a creature, but of an absence, a void that was trying to consume me. I stumbled back, falling to the floor. The eyes were still there, staring. They didn't blink. They just watched, a silent, terrifying presence in the fog. I covered my face with my hands, but I could still feel their gaze burning through my skin. I know it's not over. The fog will lift, but the eyes will be waiting. They will be waiting for me to step outside again, to take another midnight walk. I will never take a midnight walk again. I will never feel safe again. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a figment of my overactive imagination. I grabbed my phone, my hands still shaking, and called my friend, Ilara. I tried to explain, but my words came out in a jumbled mess. She listened patiently, but dismissed it as a bad dream, a side effect of my stress. I hung up, the conversation doing little to calm me. I slowly got up and approached the window again. The eyes were gone. A wave of relief washed over me, but then I saw it. A single, long, thin scratch mark, like a claw had been dragged across the glass. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I spent the day on my computer, searching for anything about creatures in the fog. I found old, forgotten blog posts and dusty online forums. I found mentions of shadows and skinwalkers, but they were all dismissed as folklore. Ilara came over in the evening, worried about my silence. She saw the state of my house, the books, the frantic notes. I showed her the scratch mark on the window. She touched it, her brow furrowed. "It's just a scratch, Kaylin," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The fog returned that night, thicker than before. Ilara decided to stay. We were sitting in silence when we heard it. A gentle tapping, not on the window, but on the roof. Tap, tap, tap. It was a sound that shouldn't be there. The tapping stopped, and a new sound began. A scratching, a scraping, coming from the chimney. The creature was trying a new way in. My eyes met Ilara's. The skepticism was gone from her face, replaced by pure terror. "Fire," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "The old stories. They said it was afraid of fire." Ilara looked at me, her eyes wide. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the kindling and a lighter, her hands shaking. The fire roared to life, and the scratching stopped instantly. A cloud of smoke billowed out of the chimney and into the room. For a moment, I thought I saw them. Two hollow black eyes swirling in the smoke, filled with a cold, silent rage. The smoke cleared, and the eyes were gone. The silence was broken only by the crackling of the fire. Ilara and I collapsed onto the couch, our bodies shaking with exhaustion. We looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. We were not helpless. We had a weapon. The next day, we worked tirelessly. We boarded up the windows. We gathered every piece of wood we could find. We fortified the house. We were no longer running. We were preparing for a battle. The fog returned, a thick, suffocating blanket, and with it, the sounds. Not just one, but many. Scraping on the walls, tapping on the roof, a low, guttural growl from the darkness outside. The creature had brought friends. We lit every fireplace, every stove, every corner of the house. The house became a beacon of light in the suffocating darkness. The heat was intense, but it was a welcome heat. A heat that kept the shadows at bay. The sounds stopped. The fog began to lift, slowly, silently. The creatures were gone. We stood in the middle of our fortress, exhausted but victorious. We knew the battle was not over. The fog would return, and the eyes would be waiting, but we would be ready. Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark. The old man at the depot called it a ghost job. "Nobody's been down there in 30 years, Silas," he rasped, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and reverence. I just nodded, my hand resting on my worn high-vis vest. I'd been a tunnel inspector for 20 years, and I'd seen it all. Floods, collapses, forgotten relics. But this one was different. There was a chill in the air around the sealed-off entrance, a silence that felt heavier than any rock. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rust. As I descended the narrow, winding staircase, my headlamp cut a harsh, white circle through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the peeling paint on the concrete walls. Each step echoed, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness below. I was alone, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic creak of my boots on the metal stairs. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound, like a distant engine struggling to turn over. A growl. I stopped, my breath misting in the cold air. It was faint, barely there, and I tried to rationalize it. The old pipes, the wind, a trick of the acoustics. But the sound didn't feel mechanical. It felt alive. I gripped my flashlight tighter and continued my descent. The staircase opened into a vast, circular tunnel. My headlamp swept across the curved walls, revealing a section that wasn't on my schematics. The concrete was different here, smoother, and covered in a strange, slick film. The air was colder, and the faint growl was now a low hum that vibrated through the floor beneath my feet. This wasn't a forgotten tunnel. It was something else entirely. The hum grew louder, more insistent. I saw it then, a flicker of movement at the very edge of my light's reach. A shape that was too tall, too thin to be human. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to shout, but my voice caught in my throat. The growl was right there, just out of sight, and I knew it was watching me. My light finally caught it. It was gaunt, emaciated, its stretched, translucent skin revealing the sinew and bone beneath. Its eyes were hollow and black, and it stood hunched over, its limbs long and thin. The growl that had been a hum was now a low, menacing rumble in its chest. I was frozen, my mind unable to process the horror before me. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, a terrifying speed that defied its skeletal form. In a single, sickening motion, it was gone, disappearing into the oppressive darkness as if it had never been there at all. The growl lingered, a chilling echo that seemed to come from all directions. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move, to turn and run. The way back was gone. A fresh pile of rubble and twisted metal blocked the staircase I had used to descend. The air was thick with dust, and the silence that followed the collapse was even more terrifying than the growl. I was trapped. The growl came again, louder this time. It was no longer a hum. It was a taunt. I spun around, my light sweeping the tunnel, but there was nothing. It was toying with me, a predator enjoying its hunt. The sound echoed off the walls, a chorus of menacing rumbles that seemed to be closing in. I saw a small, narrow passage, a maintenance crawl space I hadn't noticed before. It was my only way out. I dropped to my hands and knees, my heart pounding, and began to crawl. The rough concrete scraping against my high-vis vest. The space was tight, claustrophobic, and the darkness was absolute. I felt it then. A cold, skeletal hand brushed against my leg. My blood ran cold, and I scrambled forward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The growl was right behind me now, a hot, foul breath on my neck. I could feel the creature's presence, its unnatural grace, as it slithered through the tight space after me. I burst out into a vertical service shaft, scrambling to my feet and clawing my way up a rusted ladder. I didn't look back until I reached the top. my hand shaking as I fumbled with the hatch. As I sealed it shut, I looked down one last time. In the deep, oppressive darkness below, two hollow black eyes stared up at me. The growl was a final, chilling echo before the hatch clicked shut, leaving me alone with the memory of what was still waiting in the forgotten tunnel. I was safe, for now. I stood in a new, unknown section of the tunnel system. The silence, a new kind of terror. It was a false sense of security, a quiet that felt heavier than the growl itself. The feeling of being hunted remained, a cold knot in my stomach. I had escaped the creature, but I hadn't escaped the tunnel. I started walking, my footsteps echoing in the sterile tunnel. The walls were lined with pipes and wires, and the air was cold and damp. I saw a door ahead, a heavy metal door with a small, grimy window. It was a control room, a sign of civilization, a potential way to call for help. I tried the handle, but it was locked. That's when I heard it. A faint scratching sound from inside the control room, like something dragging its long, thin fingers across the floor. It wasn't the growl, but a different, more deliberate sound. The tapping morphed into a rhythmic pattern, a kind of code. My mind, trained by years of working in these tunnels, recognized it instantly. It was an old Morse code signal. I deciphered it, my heart pounding in my chest. H-E-L-P. A shiver ran down my spine. Someone else was in here. Or was. The tapping stopped. I heard a new sound. A wet, squelching sound from inside the room. The growl was back. It was never gone. It was just waiting. The sound of the creature was muffled by the door, but it was unmistakably the same menacing rumble that had haunted me since I'd entered the tunnel. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The creature was not just a monster. It was intelligent. It was toying with me, luring me in. The help signal was a trap, a twisted game. I turned and ran down the tunnel, away from the control room, away from the sound. I found a maintenance access panel, a small, rusted rectangle in the wall. I pried it open and slipped inside, pulling the panel shut behind me. I was in a dark, narrow space filled with pipes and wires. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and decay, and the darkness was absolute. I heard the growl again, but it was different. It wasn't a hum or a rumble. It was a sound of frustration, of rage. The creature was outside, scratching at the access panel, its long, thin fingers scraping against the metal. It knew I was here. It was just a matter of time. The scratching stopped. A new sound began, a slow, deliberate tapping. It was the Morse code again. This time, I didn't need to decipher it. I knew what it meant. It was a taunt, a final, terrifying message. I-S-E-E-Y-O-U. I felt a vibration through the metal floor. The creature was not just outside. It was moving through the walls, through the pipes. It was everywhere. I couldn't hide. The growl was no longer a sound. It was a presence, a weight on my soul, a constant, menacing pressure. I saw a faint light at the end of the maintenance tunnel. A shaft of sunlight. I crawled towards it, a new surge of hope pushing me forward. I could hear the growl behind me, a constant, menacing presence. But the light was my only focus, my only salvation. I reached the end of the tunnel, a small grate leading to the outside. I pushed it open, and the fresh air hit my face, a cool, clean shock after the stale, damp air of the tunnel. I scrambled out, collapsing on the ground, gasping for breath. I was free. I looked back at the grate, at the darkness I just escaped. I saw nothing, but I knew it was there. I knew it was waiting. The growl was no longer an echo in a forgotten tunnel. It was an echo in my mind, a constant reminder of the horror I faced. I knew I would never be truly free. Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark. I've lived by this old well for 30 years. It's my only neighbor. The stones are slick with moss, the water black and still. I thought I knew every secret it held, every creak and groan of its ancient timbers. But lately, a new feeling has settled in the air. A cold, heavy dread that clings to the night mist. I tell myself it was just the wind or the loneliness finally catching up to me. But I knew it wasn't. The first sound was a whisper, a wet, slithering sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. It was the sound of something dragging itself through mud, but 100 times worse. It was the sound of flesh against wet stone. I couldn't stay away. My feet moved on their own, a morbid curiosity pulling me closer. I peered over the edge, my breath catching in my throat. The water was no longer still. It was churning, a slow, sickening boil. Then, a flicker, a faint, malevolent glow from the depths. It was a single, bulbous eye, pale and milky, like the moon, but filled with a cold, ancient malice. It blinked once, and the water rippled in response. It wasn't alone. Another eye, and then another, broke the surface. They were a constellation of horrors, each one staring up at me with the same cold, empty light. The churning intensified, and a foul, metallic smell rose from the well. The slithering sound grew louder, more distinct. It was the sound of something impossibly large, trying to squeeze through a space too small for it. The well groaned in protest, the ancient timbers beginning to splinter. A sound like wet, tearing fabric, and a shape began to emerge. It was an amalgamation of waterlogged flesh and slick, black ichor, a formless horror pulling itself from the well's throat. It moved with a sickening, slithering motion, each movement a violation of nature. My body was a statue of terror. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground. I watched, paralyzed, as the thing pulled itself free, its grotesque form fully revealed in the pale moonlight. stood before me, not on legs, but on a sickening mass of slithering flesh. It turned its head, if you could call it that, and all of its eyes, a dozen or more, focused on me at once. There was no thought in them, only a cold, consuming hunger. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and something metallic, like old blood. It was the smell of the thing itself, a miasma of ancient rot that clung to the night. I felt it coating my lungs, burning my throat. The slithering sound began again, closer this time. It was moving towards me, a slow, deliberate crawl that made my skin feel like it was peeling away. The air grew colder, and the metallic smell intensified. I could see the individual strands of its formless body, the way they shifted and writhed over one another. It was a liquid horror, a living puddle of malice that defied all known biology. The ground beneath it seemed to sizzle and blacken, the grass withering instantly. It left a trail of glistening black slime in its wake, a trail that steamed in the cold night air. My mind was a kaleidoscope of terror, flashing through memories of a life that felt a million miles away. My small cabin, the simple meals, the quiet solitude I had so cherished. All of it was about to be erased. The thing was close now. I could hear the wet, sucking sound of its body against the earth. It was a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my short, miserable life. Finally, the paralysis broke. I stumbled backward, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I turned to run, to escape this nightmare, but a shadow fell over me. It was too late. The thing was faster than it looked. A horrifying blur of black ichor and pulsating flesh. I felt a cold, wet touch on my ankle, and a shock of pure, agonizing cold shot up my leg. I fell, my face hitting the cold, damp earth. The metallic smell was overwhelming, and I could feel the slimy, wet body of the thing crawling over my back, its weight crushing me. A wet, sucking sound, and I felt a sharp, piercing pain in my shoulder. The thing was not just crawling over me. It was beginning to consume me, to absorb me into its grotesque form. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was filled with the metallic stench, and my lungs burned. My vision began to blur, the pale moonlight and the glowing eyes of the creature merging into a single, horrifying light. The cold was absolute now, a penetrating chill that went beyond my skin, deep into my bones. It was the cold of a place where life had never existed, a place of ancient, cosmic emptiness. My body was no longer my own. I could feel the sickening transformation, the merging of my flesh with the things. My bones felt like they were dissolving, my blood turning to ichor. The last thing I saw was the milky moonlight reflecting in a dozen cold, dead eyes, and the last thing I heard was the sickening, wet sound of it finally consuming me. Now, I am part of the well. I am the cold, the dread, the wet, slithering sound. I am the thing that waits in the black water, watching, listening for the next curious soul to come too close. Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark. I've hiked this trail 100 times, or so it feels. The old logging road, the moss-covered stones, the way the light filters through the canopy. It's all a comforting rhythm. But today, the silence was different. It wasn't the usual forest quiet. It was a heavy, expectant stillness. My bright red rain jacket felt like a beacon in the gloom. It was a straight line where there should have been none. A perfect, unnatural geometry cutting through the chaos of the undergrowth. My heart gave a little jump. I veered off the path, pushing through ferns and tangled roots, drawn by a curiosity that felt less like an instinct and more like a compulsion. Then I saw it. A staircase. Not a rickety old one, but something impossibly clean and new. The wood was polished, gleaming faintly in the dim light, with no sign of dirt or decay. It ascended into the air, a perfect, silent line, and disappeared into the mist above the treetops. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A forgotten art installation? A movie prop? But there was no sign of a crew. No footprints. No disturbed earth. It was simply there. A piece of impossible architecture dropped into the middle of a forgotten forest. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and touched the first step. It was smooth and cool, like glass, but with the subtle grain of wood. There was no vibration, no hum, no sound at all. Just an absolute, profound stillness. It felt wrong, not evil, but alien, like touching a piece of a different reality. A voice in my head, the one that screamed run, was drowned out by another quieter voice that whispered climb. I put my foot on the first step. It held my weight with a silent, unyielding strength. I took another step, and another. The forest floor shrinking below me. The mist grew thicker, swallowing the world I knew. The world below became a tapestry of green and gray, a place I no longer belonged to. The air grew colder, and the silence became absolute. It wasn't just a lack of sound. It was a presence, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed in from all sides. I felt observed, not by a person, but by the space itself. I kept climbing, but the top never seemed to get closer. The steps just continued, a never-ending ascent into the white. I looked back, and the forest was gone, replaced by a swirling, featureless gray. There was nothing left but me, the staircase, and the profound, cold emptiness. It was then I noticed the light. Not sunlight, but an ethereal, pearlescent glow that seemed to emanate from the wood itself. It pulsed faintly, in a rhythm that was not my own. With each pulse, the air tasted of something ancient and metallic, and the silence deepened, becoming a roar in my ears. I felt a strange detachment, as if my own body was a vessel I was piloting from a great distance. My thoughts were no longer my own, replaced by a cold, calculating logic that didn't belong to me. I was no longer Corbin, the hiker. I was just another component of the staircase, a piece of something vast and uncaring. I looked down at my hands, and they were no longer mine. They were still my hands, but they were moving with a purpose I didn't understand, a purpose that was not my own. The staircase wasn't a destination, it was a journey, and I was no longer the traveler. I was the path. The last thought I had was a simple one. I am here. And then there was nothing. Just the silent, endless climb, the pearlescent light, and the knowledge that I was no longer a person, but a part of the staircase, ascending forever into the great cosmic silence. Time had no meaning here. It was a river, and I was a stone at its bottom, feeling its flow without being carried by it. My thoughts, once a frantic storm, were now a slow, deliberate hum. I was still here, but I was also everywhere the staircase was. I felt the cold of the mist, the pressure of the air, the unyielding strength of the polished wood. I saw things I shouldn't have been able to see, not with my eyes, but with the staircases, glimpses of other worlds, other skies, a sky of swirling purple and green with 3 moons, a sky of perpetual twilight with silent, geometric structures floating in the air. The staircase was a bridge, and I was a piece of its span. The silence was not empty. It was filled with a chorus of whispers, a symphony of forgotten voices. They were not words, but concepts. The feeling of 1,000 different ascents, 1,000 different descents. They were the echoes of those who had climbed before me. Their consciousnesses absorbed, their stories forgotten. The dread returned, but it was different now. It was not a personal fear, but a collective one. The staircase was not a destination, but a process. It was a machine for harvesting consciousness, for collecting and archiving the last, most precious moments of 1,000 lives. I was not the first, and I would not be the last. I felt a flicker of my old self, a memory, the smell of damp earth after a rain, the feel of the sun on my face, a flash of my red rain jacket, a beacon of defiance against the gloom. It was a desperate, futile attempt to reclaim my identity, to remember who I was before I became this. The staircase responded. The pearlescent light pulsed faster, and the hum in my mind grew louder, more insistent. It was a cold, alien logic, a simple command. Assimilate. The whispers of the others grew louder, a chorus of resignation and acceptance. They were not trapped. They were at peace. I fought back. I clung to the memory of my name, Corbin. I clung to the feeling of my own hands, my own feet. I was not a piece of wood. I was not a part of a machine. I was a person. I was a hiker. I was me. It was a losing battle. My memories began to unravel, like a thread pulled from a sweater. The face of a friend, a favorite song, the taste of a good meal, they all dissolved into the hum. into the cold, calculating logic of the staircase. The last thing to go was the color. The vibrant red of my jacket, the last bastion of my individuality, began to fade. It became a muted rust, then a dull brown, and finally a deep, lifeless gray, blending into the mist and the wood. I had a final thought, a final, desperate plea. I am Corbin. I am here. It was a whisper in the great cosmic silence, a last, futile attempt to assert my existence. And then, the whisper was gone, the last flicker of my consciousness, the last vestige of my humanity was extinguished. I was no longer a person. I was no longer a thought. I was a part of the staircase. The staircase continued its ascent, a silent, unyielding monument to a cosmic purpose I could never comprehend. It was a bridge to nowhere, a trap for the curious, a collector of souls, and I was one of them. The silence was no longer heavy or expectant. It was absolute. The staircase was a part of the silence, and the silence was a part of the staircase, and I was a part of both, forever. Like this video before something in the dark likes you. Subscribe now, or you'll miss the next scream. And comment below, if you dare, tell me your worst fear.